When your phone buzzes at 1:03 a.m., you know something in your life has gone wrong in a way that can never be undone. I was half asleep when the screen lit up my bedroom like an interrogation lamp. For a second, I thought it was one of those random alerts people ignore at night. But then I saw the name. It said the message was from Jason, my husband. But the contact label beneath it didn't say Jason Home or Jason Cell. It said, Dr. Brianna Hayes, work. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening before I had even opened the text. My fingers suddenly felt cold, heavy, almost numb. Then I read the message. He's occupied right now. He'll call you later. That was it. One sentence. One clean, casual sentence from a woman who clearly felt comfortable enough to pick up my husband's phone in the middle of the night and answer me like I was some minor inconvenience she could dismiss with a shrug. I remember sitting straight up in bed so fast the blanket slid to the floor. There are moments in life when your body understands the truth before your mind can catch up. My pulse started hammering. My jaw locked. My stomach dropped so violently, it felt like an elevator cable had snapped inside me. Because there are only so many innocent explanations for a female doctor texting a wife from her husband's phone at 1 a.m, and none of them begin with dignity. Jason worked maintenance security contracts for Memorial Hospital. Dr. Brianna Hayes was one of the department heads there. Beautiful, polished, admired, the kind of woman people described with words like brilliant and graceful and untouchable. I had met her twice at hospital functions. She had shaken my hand with a smile that was too smooth, too practiced, too perfectly warm. Now she was holding my husband's phone in the dark. Something inside me went still, not calm. Still. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm rips a roof off a house. So I typed back with fingers that barely looked like mine. No need, you can have him, we're done. Then I added a period. Because if my marriage was going to die at 1:03 a.m., I wanted its death certificate to have proper punctuation. I hit send. And less than 10 minutes later, someone started pounding on my front door like guilt had finally learned how to run. My name is Mia Martinez. I was 36 years old when my marriage cracked open so loudly that even people who had never cared about my life suddenly had opinions about it. I'm a locksmith by trade. Before that, I worked in law enforcement for several years, long enough to develop two habits that never really left me. I notice details, and I don't trust explanations that arrive too quickly. Locks teach you things too. Most people think a lock is about keeping danger out. It isn't. A lock is really about trust. It only works because someone believes the right person is on the other side. For a long time, I believed that person was Jason. Jason Martinez was charming in the easy, unthreatening way that makes people feel safe around a man before they realize how much of him stays hidden. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He had a calm voice, a patient smile, and a way of tilting his head when he listened that made you feel like what you said mattered. We met at a neighborhood fundraiser 6 years earlier, back when I was still trying to rebuild myself after leaving the police force. I had been helping install temporary locks and barriers for the event because the church committee somehow always discovered my profession 5 minutes before a crisis. Jason was there handling facility logistics for Memorial Hospital's outreach team. He was carrying folding tables by himself because, as he later told me, everyone else had mysteriously disappeared the moment heavy lifting became necessary. "You look like you're 2 bad decisions away from throwing that table at someone," I told him the first time we spoke. He laughed, set the table down, and said, "Only if you promise to help me hide the body." It was stupid, simple, harmless. And maybe that was why I liked him. With Jason, nothing felt forced in the beginning. He brought me coffee when he knew I'd been up on early service calls. He remembered things people usually forget, how I hated artificial vanilla scent, how I took my eggs soft, how I went quiet when I was overwhelmed and needed space before I could talk. He never seemed intimidated by the fact that I knew how to read people, or that I had a job most men treated like a novelty until they realized I knew more about security than they did. Back then, he made room for me, and I made room for him. We got married 2 years later in a modest ceremony, with both our families pretending for one perfect afternoon that love was enough to smooth out every hard edge two people carry into a marriage. My mother cried through the vows. Jason's mother hugged me like she had always wanted a daughter. The reception hall smelled like buttercream and roses and coffee, and at one point, Jason leaned close and whispered, "We made it." I believed him. For a while, our life even looked the way good marriages are supposed to look from the outside. Shared groceries, shared bills, shared Sunday mornings where one of us would still be half asleep while the other pretended to be annoyed about making coffee. We had inside jokes, we had routines, we had those small domestic rhythms people mistake for permanence. But routines can hide rot. The first year of marriage felt solid. The second year felt busy. By the third, something had shifted, though I couldn't have told you exactly when the air changed. It was like living in a house where one window never quite closes anymore. Nothing dramatic, just a draft you keep noticing when the night gets quiet. Jason started working later, more often. At first, it made sense. Memorial Hospital was always expanding something, fixing something, updating some wing or security system or maintenance schedule. He said the hours were temporary. Then temporary turned into normal. He became harder to reach in the evenings. More tired. Less present. There were nights when he would sit beside me on the couch while scrolling through his phone, nodding at things I said without hearing them. There were mornings when I kissed him goodbye and felt, with that strange female intuition people like to mock until it proves right, that he had already left the room emotionally before his body followed. I asked him about it more than once. "Are we okay?" I said one night while folding laundry together. He didn't even look up from the towel in his hands. "Yeah, just tired." Another time, over takeout gone cold between us, I said, "You feel far away lately." He gave me a weary smile. "You're imagining things, Mia. Work's just been brutal." And because marriage trains you to want innocent explanations, I took the one he offered. There were other things too, small things, the kind of details that only become evidence in hindsight. A new cologne he insisted a vendor had given him as a sample. A sudden interest in looking more professional for hospital events he used to hate. Text messages he angled slightly away from me without seeming to realize he was doing it. A woman's name appearing too often in stories that, at the time, sounded ordinary. Dr. Brianna Hayes. Brianna said this. Brianna needs that. Brianna's under pressure. Brianna stayed late. Brianna asked if Jason could help with something after hours. At first, I never cared. Why would I? She was his superior at work, a respected physician, divorced, from what little I knew, with a reputation for intelligence and poise. She moved through hospital charity events in elegant dresses with the kind of confidence that makes people straighten their shoulders when she approaches. When I met her, she was perfectly polite. Too polite, maybe. "Jason says you're incredible with security systems," she told me once, smiling over the rim of a wine glass. I smiled back. "He exaggerates." "No," she said. "Men usually don't exaggerate a woman's competence unless they're intimidated by it." At the time, I almost admired the line. Later, I would remember it and feel sick. Jason's family didn't help the uneasy feeling that had started to settle into my chest those last few months. His mother began making those little comments some women weaponize while pretending they're harmless. "You work so much, mija," she told me over dinner one Sunday. "Men don't always say when they feel neglected." I set my fork down carefully. If Jason feels neglected, he can use words. She gave that pinched smile mothers sometimes give wives when they think diplomacy is beneath them. "I'm only saying marriage needs softness." I wanted to ask why that softness was always expected from the wife first. I wanted to ask why men could disappear emotionally for months and still be treated like fragile creatures whose loneliness required female management. But Jason was right there, chewing quietly, saying nothing. That silence said more than any defense could have. By then, I had already begun doing what women do when love stops feeling safe. I started collecting impressions and calling them overthinking. The late nights, the distance, the irritability, the defensiveness whenever I mentioned Brianna's name. I didn't know yet that suspicion is often just truth arriving before proof. All I knew was this. By the time my phone lit up at 1:03 a.m., some part of me had already been bracing for impact. I just hadn't realized the collision had started long before that text arrived. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. Not obvious enough to accuse someone, but obvious enough that once the truth surfaced, every memory rearranged itself into a pattern I could no longer ignore. The distance between Jason and me hadn't appeared overnight. It had grown quietly, like mold spreading behind a wall where no one thinks to look until the smell becomes impossible to ignore. At first, it was just work. "Another late shift?" I asked one evening while watching him button his shirt in the hallway mirror. He sighed like a man burdened by responsibilities he never asked for. "Memorial's short-staffed. Brianna's trying to keep the department from collapsing." There it was again, her name. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed loosely. "You mention her a lot lately." Jason didn't turn around. "She's my supervisor." The answer was technically correct, and somehow completely unsatisfying. I let it go. At the time, I told myself it would be ridiculous to feel threatened by a woman my husband worked with. People have coworkers. They talk about them. That's normal. But normal has a rhythm. And the rhythm of Jason's stories about Brianna slowly started to feel rehearsed. "She's brilliant," he said once while we were eating dinner. Another time, while scrolling through his phone, he muttered with admiration, "You should see the way she handles hospital politics. No one pushes her around." One night, I asked casually, "Does she ever go home?" He laughed. "Doctors live at the hospital." It was said as a joke. But a week later, I discovered something that didn't quite fit that narrative. Jason had forgotten his jacket on the back of a dining chair. I picked it up to hang it in the closet, and when I did, something fell out of the inside pocket. A receipt. From a wine bar downtown, 2 glasses of Cabernet, a charcuterie board. Total, $68. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. I held the receipt for a long moment. Jason had told me that night he was fixing a security access issue in the surgical wing. Wine bars don't usually exist inside surgical wings. When he came home later that night, I was sitting on the couch with the receipt on the coffee table. He stopped in the doorway when he saw it. "That yours?" I asked calmly. His eyes flicked down. "Oh, that. Yeah, Brianna and I grabbed a drink after a meeting." "You said you were working late." "We were." "At a wine bar?" He rubbed the back of his neck, irritated. "Mia, it was one drink. Hospital people decompress after shifts. You're making something out of nothing." That phrase, making something out of nothing. It's one of the oldest tricks in the world. Turn suspicion into embarrassment so the other person questions their own instincts. So I nodded. "Okay." But something inside me had shifted slightly. The next few weeks brought more tiny inconsistencies. Jason began guarding his phone in ways he never had before. He started bringing it into the bathroom with him. He flipped it face down whenever he set it on the table. And the biggest sign of all, the one every woman recognizes instantly, was the way he reacted when I asked simple questions. He didn't just answer, he defended. "Why are you asking that? Don't you trust me? You're being paranoid." One evening, I was standing at the sink washing dishes when Jason walked into the kitchen, already dressed to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Hospital meeting." "Again?" He frowned. "You sound like my mother." I dried my hands slowly. "You've had 5 hospital meetings this week." "That's because we're in the middle of a department transition." "Does that transition involve Brianna?" His jaw tightened. "Why are you obsessed with her?" I stared at him. I asked one question, and it sounded like an accusation. "That's interesting," I said quietly, "because I didn't accuse you of anything." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jason grabbed his keys. "I don't have time for this." The door closed behind him harder than necessary. I stood in the kitchen listening to the silence that followed. Something had definitely changed, but the truth was still out of reach. And then there were the people around us. Sometimes conflict doesn't grow between 2 people alone. Sometimes it's watered by everyone watching. Jason's friend group had always been casual with boundaries, but recently their behavior toward me started feeling strange. At a barbecue one Saturday, one of his coworkers joked, "Jason's been putting in heroic hours at the hospital lately." Another guy smirked. "Yeah, man, real heroic." They laughed in that awkward, half-suppressed way people laugh when they're sharing a joke that only half the room understands. I looked at Jason. He avoided my eyes. Later that evening, I asked him about it while we were driving home. "What was that about?" "What?" "The way your friends were talking." He shrugged. "Just stupid guy humor." But the next day, something else happened. I was at a hardware supply store picking up lock cylinders for a job when I ran into Emma, one of in this new life, Jason's, friends from the hospital fitness group. Emma taught spin classes downtown and had known Jason through Memorial's employee wellness programs. She looked surprised to see me. "Mia, hey." "Hey," I said, smiling politely. We chatted for a minute about work, the weather, nothing important. But before we parted, Emma said something that stuck in my head. "You must be proud of Jason." I frowned slightly. "For what?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, I just meant he's really, well-liked at the hospital." There was a pause. The kind of pause where a person suddenly realizes they may have said something they shouldn't have. Then she added quickly, "I mean professionally." Professionally. I drove home with that word echoing strangely in my mind, because Emma hadn't sounded like she meant professionally at all. That was the moment when suspicion stopped being a faint whisper and became a quiet voice in my head, asking a much harder question. Not if something was wrong, but how long it had been wrong. Still, I didn't confront Jason again. Not yet, because instincts are one thing, proof is another. And proof finally arrived at 1:03 a.m. when another woman felt comfortable enough to answer my husband's phone. The pounding on my front door started exactly 9 minutes after I sent that message. Not a polite knock. Not the hesitant tap of someone unsure whether they should be there. It was desperate. The kind of pounding that comes from people who suddenly realize the lie they were building their lives on has collapsed in public. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at the door across the apartment. My heart wasn't racing anymore. Strangely, it felt slow and heavy, like it had already accepted something my mind was still processing. Then the pounding started again. "Mia, please open the door," Jason's voice. Hoarse, panicked, and behind it, another voice. A woman's voice, soft but urgent. "Mia, please, this is a misunderstanding. Dr. Brianna Hayes." Of course. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the front door, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The apartment was dim, except for the streetlight bleeding through the blinds. Everything felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. When I reached the door, I didn't open it. I looked through the peephole first, and there they were. Jason stood closest to the door, still wearing the same shirt he had left the house in earlier that evening. His hair was disheveled, his face pale with panic. Next to him stood Brianna. Her hospital scrubs were wrinkled. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. Her hair looked like it had been hastily tied back after being completely undone, not the neat, polished doctor I had met at charity events. This woman looked like someone who had been caught. Jason knocked again. "Mia, please, just let me explain." I rested my forehead briefly against the door. Then I reached down and turned the deadbolt. Not all the way. Just enough that they would hear it. Click. Both of them froze outside. I slid the chain lock into place slowly, letting the metal scrape loudly against the frame. Then I opened the door 4 inches. Jason immediately leaned forward. "Mia, thank God." "Stop," I said quietly. The chain stretched tight between us. 4 inches of space. That was all they were getting. Up close, Jason looked worse than he had through the peephole. His eyes were bloodshot. His breathing was uneven. Brianna stood slightly behind him, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, or ashamed, or pretending to be ashamed. "It's not what you think," Jason said quickly. Of course, the most predictable sentence in the history of human betrayal. Behind him, Brianna added, "There was a medical situation. Jason was helping me with something at the hospital." I blinked slowly. A medical situation. Yes, she said, nodding quickly. One of the IV pumps malfunctioned, and I raised my hand slightly. Please, both of. For a moment, the only sound was the wind outside and the faint hum of the hallway light. Then I looked directly at Brianna. At 1:03 in the morning, I said evenly, you picked up my husband's phone and texted me that he was occupied. She swallowed. Yes, but... And you thought that would reassure me. Jason stepped forward again. She was just trying to help. I wasn't talking to you. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that he stopped immediately. Then I looked back at Brianna. You're a doctor, I said slowly. A respected professional. A department head at Memorial Hospital. Yes. So tell me something I'm genuinely curious about. She waited. If this was a hospital emergency, I tilted my head slightly. Why are you both standing on my doorstep looking like you just left a motel? Jason's face flushed red. That's not fair, isn't it? Brianna tried again. Mia, you're upset. I understand that. Do you? My voice cut through the hallway like glass. Because from where I'm standing, you look remarkably calm for a woman who just helped destroy a marriage. Her eyes widened. Jason stepped forward again, desperation creeping into his voice. Mia, please, just let us inside so we can talk. I stared at him. Inside. The word felt almost funny. Inside was where we had built our life. Inside was where our wedding photos hung on the wall. Inside was where I had trusted him for years. And now he was asking for entry like a stranger. I don't think so, I said quietly. Jason's voice cracked. Mia, please. Tell me one thing, I interrupted. He stopped. Why did she feel comfortable answering your phone? Silence. Heavy. Embarrassed. Then Jason said weakly, she was just trying to explain. No, I said softly. She was claiming territory. Brianna inhaled sharply. Jason shook his head. That's not true. I leaned slightly closer to the door. Then tell me something else, I said. Neither of them moved. If this was an innocent hospital emergency, my eyes moved slowly between them. Why are you both here together at 1 a.m, trying to convince a locksmith you didn't just break into her marriage? Neither of them had an answer. Jason's shoulders sagged. Brianna looked down at the floor. And in that moment, standing in my doorway, separated from them by nothing more than a metal chain, I realized something important. I didn't need their confession. Their silence was already the truth. I began closing the door. Jason panicked. Mia, wait. The chain rattled as the door moved. I gave you my life, I said quietly. Then the door shut. Click. And just like that, the conversation was over. But the story was only beginning. Morning arrived without mercy. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. At some point, I ended up on the couch with a blanket twisted around my legs and an empty beer bottle sitting on the coffee table, like evidence from a crime scene. The apartment smelled faintly like stale hops and rain from the storm that had started sometime after Jason and Dr. Brianna Hayes left my doorstep. I stared at the ceiling until the gray light of dawn began creeping through the blinds. There's a strange silence that settles after betrayal. It's not dramatic. There are no violins playing in the background. Just a dull, steady hum in your chest where something used to feel stable. I kept replaying the last few months in my head. The late nights, the wine bar receipt, Emma's awkward comment, the way Jason had flinched whenever Brianna's name came up. Every memory now felt like a puzzle piece that had been sitting in the wrong place. At 7:47 a.m., my phone started ringing. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I almost didn't answer. But mothers have a supernatural ability to detect when their children's lives are collapsing, even when those children are fully grown adults who insist they're fine. I picked up. Hello. Her voice came through immediately, sharp and worried. Mia Elena Martinez. Uh-oh. When my mother used my full name, it meant one of two things. Someone had died, or someone had embarrassed the family. I need you to explain something to me, she continued. I rubbed my eyes. What happened? Why has Jason's car been parked outside Memorial Hospital staff housing for 3 nights? I sat up slowly. How do you know that? Dolores from church saw it when she visited her sister in the oncology wing, my mother said. She told Patricia. Patricia told me. Of course, small-town information networks move faster than the internet. And now, my mother continued, lowering her voice dramatically, half the congregation thinks your husband is having an affair. I leaned back against the couch. The irony almost made me laugh. It's true, I said quietly. Silence. Then, ¿qué? Her voice exploded into a rapid-fire mix of Spanish and English, so fast I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Mia, I knew something was wrong. That boy always smiled too much. I told you a man who smiles like that is hiding something. Mom, does he think marriage is a game? After everything we did for that wedding? Mom, and with a doctor? Of course it's a doctor. Doctors always think they're better than everyone. Mom. She finally stopped long enough to breathe. Yes? I found out last night. Another pause. How? At 1 a.m, I said flatly, when his girlfriend texted me from his phone. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I could almost hear her brain rearranging the information. Then she spoke softly. Mija. I'm fine. You sound like you're not fine. I'm working on it. We talked a few minutes longer, mostly consisting of my mother threatening violence against Jason in several languages, before I convinced her to let me handle things my way. When I hung up, the apartment felt even quieter than before. That was when I noticed something strange. Jason hadn't come back. Not after I shut the door. Not in the early morning hours. Not even to grab his things. Which meant one thing. He hadn't gone home after leaving my doorstep. He had gone back to her. I was still processing that realization when I heard the sound of a key sliding into the front door lock. My stomach tightened instantly. Jason still had a key. That was about to change. The door opened slowly. He stepped inside like a man entering a courtroom instead of his own home. His eyes were red. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Mia, he said quietly. I didn't move from the couch. Morning. He closed the door behind him. Can we talk? I raised one hand. Before you start, I said calmly, I'd like to guess what you're about to say. Jason blinked. What? I sat up, counting on my fingers. It's not what I think. He shifted uncomfortably. You're overreacting. His jaw tightened. You're under a lot of stress. He looked away. And Brianna was just helping you with a work emergency. Jason exhaled slowly. That's basically it. I gave a small, humorless laugh. Great. I love being right. He stepped closer. Mia, listen. Last night was chaos. There really was a problem at the hospital. With the IV pump? His eyes widened. How did you... Your girlfriend mentioned it through the door. She's not my girlfriend. Then she's remarkably committed to answering your phone like one. Jason rubbed his face. You're twisting everything. No, I said quietly. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Rain began tapping softly against the windows again. Jason sank into the chair across from the couch. We've been distant for months, he said. You know that. I nodded slowly. Yes. I felt invisible. And that made you sleep with your boss? His head snapped up. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Jason's voice rose. You work all the time too, Mia. You're always fixing someone's locks, solving someone else's problems. That's my job. And what about our marriage? The room fell silent. Finally, I said, you could have talked to me. I tried. When? When you were too tired to listen. I leaned forward. You mean the 2 times you said I'm fine when I asked what was wrong? Jason didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the floor. That's not fair. I studied him carefully. You know what's not fair? He didn't respond. You let another woman answer your phone. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because there was no explanation that could survive daylight. Finally, I asked the question that had been circling my mind all morning. How long? Jason looked up slowly. What? How long has this been going on? The hesitation that followed told me everything, but I waited anyway. Because sometimes you need to hear the truth out loud before you can finally stop hoping it's something smaller. Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. A few months. The exact amount of time our marriage had started to feel like it was quietly dying. I leaned back against the couch again, exhaling slowly. Then I said the most honest thing I had said all morning. Okay. Jason looked confused. Okay? Yes. He frowned. That's it? For now. He studied my face carefully. What does that mean? I met his eyes. It means I'm done listening to excuses. The words hung in the air between us. And something in Jason's expression told me he had just realized the situation was much worse than he thought. Because I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was thinking. And thinking women are far more dangerous than angry ones. The strange thing about betrayal is that once the truth cracks the surface, everything underneath it starts surfacing faster than you can process. Jason had admitted it. 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of sleeping next to me, kissing me goodbye in the mornings, texting me love you during the day, while he was secretly building another life with Dr. Brianna Hayes. But the moment he said it out loud, something inside me stopped trying to salvage anything. Instead, I started observing, and Jason noticed. For the next 2 days, he hovered around the apartment like a man trying to repair a broken mirror with glue he didn't understand. Mia, can we talk again tonight? He asked the evening after his confession. I'm busy, I said, rekeying a lock cylinder at the kitchen table. With what? With changing the locks. He frowned. Why? I looked up calmly. Because you still have a key. Jason's face tightened. You think I'm going to steal something? No, I said. I think you've already taken what you came for. He had no reply to that. Instead, he left again that night. Not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly. And that silence told me everything I needed to know about where he was going. Meanwhile, the world around us began reacting. Because betrayal rarely stays private for long. Jason's mother called the next morning. Her voice came through my phone with the sharp tone of a woman who believed she was managing a crisis. Mia, sweetheart, Jason told me there's been a misunderstanding. I leaned back in my work chair. Did he? Yes. He said you two are going through a rough patch and you might be overreacting. I laughed softly. There it was. The oldest family defense mechanism in existence. Minimize the damage. Protect the son. Martha, I said calmly. Your son slept with his boss. The silence on the line was immediate. Then, that's not what he told me. Then he's still lying. She inhaled sharply. Well, even if something inappropriate happened, marriages survive worse things. Do they? Yes, people make mistakes. I stared at the wall for a moment. Sleeping with your supervisor for 4 months is not a mistake. Mia, it's a pattern. Her voice hardened. You're being very cold about this. I smiled faintly. Cold is what happens when trust dies. She had nothing else to say after that. But she wasn't the only one calling. By the end of that week, I had received 3 separate messages from Jason's friends trying to mediate. One of them, Kyle, even stopped by my workshop, pretending to check on me. Mia, he said awkwardly, leaning against the doorframe. Jason's really struggling. That's unfortunate. He says Brianna meant nothing. I continued polishing a lock mechanism. Then he should have treated his marriage like it meant something. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. He wants to fix things. Does he? Yeah. I finally looked up. Is he still seeing her? Kyle didn't answer. He didn't have to. That silence again. That same silence that had lived in my hallway 2 nights earlier. And that was when the second wave of damage started hitting Jason. Because while he was trying to convince people our marriage could be repaired, Dr. Brianna Hayes was still behaving like she owned him. 3 days after Jason's confession, I received a message from someone I didn't expect. Emma. Jason's friend from the hospital fitness program. The message was short. We need to talk. It's about Jason and Brianna. My pulse quickened slightly. I replied. Coffee Bean, downtown. 6 p.m. She answered immediately. I'll be there. When I arrived, Emma was already sitting in a corner booth, gripping a giant metal water bottle like it was a life preserver. She looked nervous. More nervous than someone delivering gossip. Mia, she said when I sat down. Emma. She glanced around the cafe before leaning closer. I almost didn't come. Why? Because what I'm about to show you is really bad. I folded my hands on the table. Bad how? Emma unlocked her phone. Have you ever heard of a group chat called Night Shift? I shook my head. It's a private chat some of the hospital staff use. For what? Emma turned the phone toward me. For this. The screen showed dozens of messages. Doctors, nurses, mostly men. And at the top of the chat, administrator, Dr. Brianna Hayes. My stomach dropped. Emma scrolled slowly. The messages were crude, crueler than anything I expected. People joking about hookups, keeping score, comparing stories. Then I saw Jason's name. My breath caught. One message stood out immediately. Brianna Hayes. Late shift scored me another point tonight, followed by laughing emojis. Then another message. Brianna Hayes. Martinez's husband is easier than I thought. Locksmith wife can't even lock down her own man. My vision went cold. Emma whispered, "There's more." She kept scrolling. More jokes, more comments, more humiliating references to Jason and to me. My hands curled into fists under the table. How long? I asked quietly. Emma swallowed. The chat's been active for 2 years. And Jason? She hesitated. About 4 months. Exactly the same number he had confessed. Which meant one thing. His affair hadn't just been private betrayal. It had been public entertainment. A game. A scoreboard. I looked up slowly. Why are you showing me this now? Emma's eyes filled with guilt. Because the night you found out, they were laughing about it. My chest tightened. Laughing. They were taking bets, she whispered, on whether Jason would stay with Brianna or crawl back to you. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too bright, too full of air that I didn't want to breathe. Emma's voice trembled. I didn't know it was this bad, Mia. I swear. Jason told me he was just flirting. I even helped cover for him once or twice because I thought it was harmless. I stared at the phone again, at the cruel little emojis, at the casual cruelty, at the way my marriage had been reduced to a running joke. Then I looked at Emma. Can you send me these screenshots? Her answer came immediately. Already did. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Evidence. Proof. Ammo. Emma stood up slowly. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have told you sooner. I nodded. Yes, you should have. She left the cafe a moment later. I stayed there alone for a long time, staring at the messages. Because in that moment, something changed. Until then, Jason's betrayal had been personal, painful, private. But this was humiliation. And humiliation does something dangerous to a person who already knows how to pick locks. It makes them start wondering what doors they could open if they decided to stop being polite. And that was the moment I realized something important. Jason and Brianna thought they were untouchable. They forgot something. Every system has a weakness. Every lock has a key. And I had just been handed the blueprint. The strange thing about humiliation is that it doesn't explode right away. It seeps in. Slowly. Like water leaking through cracks until the entire structure begins to rot from the inside. That night after meeting Emma, I sat alone in my apartment with my laptop open and the screenshots glowing on the screen. The rain outside had turned steady, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I must have read those messages 100 times. Each time, they felt worse. Each time, the words burned deeper. Night shift. 23 members. Doctors, nurses, staff, people who were supposed to save lives. Instead, they were running something that looked disturbingly like a competition. And Brianna Hayes was the administrator. The crown emoji next to her name suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just participating, she was leading it. One message in particular kept replaying in my mind. Martinez's husband is easier than I thought. Another. Locksmith wife can't even lock down her own man. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Calculated. Public. Jason hadn't just cheated. He had allowed another woman to mock his marriage, and me, while he stood in the same room laughing. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my face. The humiliation was so heavy it felt physical. For the first time since all of this started, anger faded, and something darker took its place. Doubt. Had I really been that blind? I replayed every memory again. Jason laughing at our wedding. Jason promising me we were a team. Jason holding my hand at my mother's birthday dinner. Had all of that been real? Or had he already been the kind of man who could casually participate in a group chat where people kept score of human beings like trophies? I pushed the laptop away and stood up. The apartment suddenly felt suffocating. Jason's jacket was still hanging on the hook near the door. For a long time, I stared at it. Then I took it down and tossed it into a trash bag. Not because it mattered, but because it was the first physical step toward removing him from the life we had built. Still, the heaviness wouldn't leave. That night, the loneliness hit harder than the anger ever had. When you discover betrayal, people assume rage is the dominant emotion. But sometimes the worst moment is when the house becomes too quiet. When the person you built your routines around simply disappears. No footsteps in the hallway, no voice in the kitchen, no one asking if you want coffee, just silence. I sat on the couch and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears sliding down my face while I stared at nothing. Because the truth was painfully simple. I had loved Jason, and now that love felt like something foolish I had handed to the wrong person. Hours passed like that. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was spilling across the living room floor, and my phone had 3 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. I ignored them at first. Then, 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number. Something told me to answer. Hello? A man's voice responded immediately. Calm. Controlled. Is this Mia Martinez? Yes. This is Daniel Hayes. My brain stalled for a second. Hayes? Yes. He paused. I'm Brianna Hayes' ex-husband. That woke me up completely. I heard, Daniel continued, that you've been gathering information about my ex-wife's activities. I sat up slowly. And how would you know that? Because when someone like Brianna starts getting nervous, Daniel said calmly, people start talking. My pulse began to rise. What do you want? I want to help you. Suspicion sharpened instantly. Why? Daniel didn't hesitate. Because I spent 10 years married to Brianna Hayes. His voice carried the quiet weight of someone who had survived something ugly. And I know exactly what kind of person she is. I didn't speak. Daniel continued. Lunch today, 12:30. Where? Rosie's Diner, East Side. He paused again. You should come alone. Why? Because what I'm going to give you, he said quietly, is the reason I divorced her. My grip tightened on the phone. What is it? Daniel's answer was simple. Evidence. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of evidence? The pause on the line stretched just long enough to make the words that followed feel heavier. The kind that destroys people, like Brianna Hayes. Then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. The apartment was still quiet, but something had changed. Because until that moment, the worst part of this story had been losing my marriage. Now something else was forming. A realization that the betrayal I experienced might only be a small piece of something much bigger. And suddenly, the loneliness I had felt the night before began transforming into something else. Something colder, something sharper, a purpose. Because if Brianna Hayes had been playing games with people's lives for years, then maybe it was time someone finally stopped her. Rosie's Diner looked exactly the way diners always look in small cities that haven't changed their interior design since the 1980s. Red vinyl booths, chrome napkin holders, a coffee machine that hissed like it had personal grievances. I arrived 10 minutes early, partly because I'm punctual, mostly because curiosity had replaced the heaviness that had been sitting in my chest all week. Daniel Hayes was already there. He sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall, the way people with experience in unpleasant situations tend to position themselves. Mid-30s, dark hair kept short, professional clothes, calm eyes that carried a quiet sharpness, the kind of man who had survived something and learned from it. He looked up when I approached. You're Mia. I slid into the seat across from him. And you're the man who married Brianna Hayes and lived to tell the story. Daniel gave a small, humorless smile. That's one way to put it. A waitress arrived and poured coffee into 2 mugs before either of us spoke again. Once she left, Daniel reached into his bag and placed something small on the table between us. A flash drive. It slid across the laminated surface until it stopped in front of me. I kept everything, Daniel said calmly. I stared at the flash drive. What exactly is everything? Photos, audio recordings, text messages, video clips. My stomach tightened slightly. From Brianna? Yes. I looked up slowly. Why? Daniel leaned back against the booth. Because when I discovered Brianna was cheating on me, I did what most people do. I believed her excuses. His eyes darkened slightly. She cried, promised it was a mistake, promised it meant nothing. That story sounded painfully familiar. So why keep the evidence? I asked. Insurance. Daniel folded his hands on the table. I didn't trust her enough to delete it. What happened? We divorced. Simple. Clean. But the quiet anger in his voice suggested the story had been anything but simple. Daniel continued. And during the divorce, I discovered something worse than the affairs. I felt my pulse pick up. What? Daniel tapped the flash drive. Brianna doesn't just cheat. He paused. She collects. The word hung in the air like smoke. Collects what? People. My eyebrows pulled together. What does that mean? Daniel leaned forward slightly. It means Brianna treats relationships like trophies. I didn't speak. Daniel continued. She keeps records. Records? Yes. His voice stayed calm, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. Names, dates, photos, videos, notes. My throat went dry. What kind of notes? Daniel looked directly at me. Ratings. I blinked. You're kidding. I wish I were. He pushed the flash drive closer to me. There's a spreadsheet on there, an actual Excel spreadsheet Brianna made. Each person she slept with over the years listed like a personal achievement log. My stomach twisted. How many? Daniel answered immediately. 47. 47. The number echoed in my head. That can't be real. It is. He took a sip of coffee before continuing. And before you ask, yes, your husband Jason is on that list. The words landed like a punch to the ribs. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Daniel kept going. Brianna is careful. She never uses hospital emails, never keeps anything on work devices. Everything is stored on encrypted personal drives. So how did you get it? Marriage, Daniel said dryly. I had access to her laptop, her passwords, her cloud storage. He tapped the flash drive again. I copied everything before the divorce. And you've been sitting on this for how long? 3 years. Why now? Daniel met my eyes. Because you're not afraid. I frowned. You barely know me. I know your type, he replied calmly. Women who investigate instead of collapsing. That sounded uncomfortably accurate. Daniel continued. And from what I hear, you've already started building something. Building what? A case. I hesitated. Emma's screenshots. The night shift chat. The jokes. The humiliation. Yes, I admitted. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. Then he said something that changed everything. You're not the first person Brianna has done this to. I already suspected that. But hearing it confirmed felt different. How many? I asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. I know of at least 8 women who tried to file complaints against her. My head snapped up. Complaints? Yes. At the hospital? At 3 different hospitals, Daniel said. Each word felt heavier than the last. She moves institutions every few years, always after something starts catching up to her. And the hospitals just let it happen? Daniel gave a bitter smile. Brianna Hayes is a brilliant surgeon with a flawless medical record. I understood immediately. So they protect her. They protect their reputation. Daniel leaned forward again. That's why this matters. He pointed at the flash drive. This isn't gossip. This is evidence. My fingers slowly closed around the flash drive. What do you want me to do with it? Daniel stood up. Expose her. Just like that. No drama. No hesitation. I looked up at him. You really think that's possible? Daniel smiled faintly. People like Brianna only survive because their victims stay isolated. He adjusted his coat. But if all the stories come out at once, He left the sentence unfinished. Then he placed $20 on the table for the coffee. Use it well, Mia. I stood as he turned to leave. Daniel. He paused. What? Why give this to me? Daniel looked back over his shoulder. Because revenge isn't the point. Then what is? His answer was simple. Accountability. Then he walked out of the diner, leaving me standing there with the flash drive in my hand. The key to everything. And suddenly, for the first time since that text message at 1:03 a.m., I didn't feel powerless anymore because Jason and Brianna had treated my marriage like a joke. But they forgot something important. I'm a locksmith, and I had just been handed the master key. The Memorial Hospital Charity Gala was scheduled for October 18th, which meant I had exactly 2 weeks to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. For the first few days after meeting Daniel, I barely slept. The flash drive sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. Every time I looked at it, I felt the same cold realization settle in my chest. Brianna Hayes hadn't just slept with my husband. She had turned betrayal into a system, a sport, 47 names, 47 lives, and Jason was just entry number 48. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop that night. Daniel hadn't exaggerated. There were folders. Dozens of them, each labeled with names and dates. Inside were screenshots of conversations, photos Brianna had saved, audio clips of her bragging to friends, and one document that made my hands go completely still. An Excel spreadsheet. The title read, Achievement Log. Columns filled with names, dates, ratings from 1 to 10, notes. Cold clinical comments like, too eager, easy target. Authority complex worked well. My stomach turned as I scrolled. Then I saw Jason's name. Jason Martinez, 7 out of 10. Married, needed validation. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it was so grotesquely impersonal. Our marriage had been reduced to a line item in someone's personal scorecard. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. People like Brianna survive because the truth never arrives all at once. So I decided to deliver it all at once. Danny Sullivan was the first person I called. Danny had been my partner back when I worked in law enforcement. After leaving the force, he had opened a private investigation firm and spent most of his time digging up truths that powerful people preferred to bury. When he arrived at my apartment 2 hours later, I handed him the flash drive without speaking. He spent 20 minutes scrolling through the files. Then he leaned back slowly. Jesus, Mia. Yeah. This is nuclear. Can it be used? Danny nodded. Oh, yeah. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, and I know exactly where. I frowned. What do you mean? Danny grinned. You know Brianna is receiving the Excellence in Medicine Award at the Memorial Hospital Gala next month, right? I blinked. You're kidding. Nope. He leaned forward. Room full of donors, hospital board members, media coverage. The idea formed instantly, and once it appeared, it was impossible to ignore. Danny. He raised an eyebrow. Yes? What if that gala became the place where the truth came out? His grin widened slowly. You're thinking about exposing her publicly. I'm thinking about accountability. Danny laughed quietly. I like accountability. And just like that, the plan began. Over the next 2 weeks, everything moved with the precision of a carefully assembled machine. Danny contacted Maria Gonzalez, an investigative journalist who had been trying for years to break a story about misconduct in the hospital system. Emma reached out quietly to several of the women Daniel had mentioned, nurses who had filed complaints years earlier but had been ignored or silenced. Some agreed to attend the gala. Some preferred to stay anonymous. But all of them gave permission for their stories to be included. Daniel helped assemble a 12-minute video, 12 minutes of Brianna Hayes condemning herself, audio recordings of her bragging, screenshots of the night shift group chat, excerpts from the infamous spreadsheet. The result was devastating and perfectly timed. Because the hospital had already confirmed that Brianna would receive her award halfway through the ceremony, exactly when the entire room would be watching. The night of the gala arrived with a gray sky and the feeling that something irreversible was about to happen. The ballroom was exactly as pretentious as I expected. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, ice sculptures shaped like stethoscopes, rich donors sipping champagne while discussing philanthropy. Danny stood near the back of the room, beside Maria Gonzalez and several other journalists, pretending not to look interested. Emma sat with two nurses who had been part of Brianna's earlier complaints. Daniel watched quietly from the shadows near the exit, and I stood in the AV control room upstairs, the flash drive in my hand. 7:30. The ceremony began. Speeches. Applause. Then finally, Dr. Alvarez stepped to the microphone. It is my great honor to present the Excellence in Medicine Award to a physician who embodies dedication, compassion, and integrity. The room filled with applause. Please welcome Dr. Brianna Hayes. Brianna walked onto the stage in a black evening gown, smiling confidently as she accepted the crystal trophy. The spotlight made her look radiant, untouchable. She stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," she began smoothly. "When I became a doctor, I made a commitment to serve my patients with integrity, and that's when I pressed play." The screens behind her flickered. Then the first image appeared. The night shift group chat. Huge, 15 feet tall, every crude message visible. The room went silent instantly. Then the audio began. Brianna's voice echoed through the speakers. "Late shift scored me another point tonight." Another message appeared. "Martinez's husband is easier than I thought." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Brianna froze on stage. Color drained from her face. The video continued. Screenshots. Audio clips. The spreadsheet. 47 entries. 47 trophies. People in the audience began standing up, some shouting, others recording with their phones. The room erupted into chaos. And for the first time that night, Brianna Hayes looked exactly like what she really was. Not brilliant. Not untouchable. Just exposed. The presentation ended 12 minutes later. Security escorted Brianna out of the ballroom while donors shouted questions and journalists rushed forward. By morning, the story was everywhere. News stations. Social media. Investigations. Memorial Hospital placed Brianna on immediate administrative leave while launching a full internal review. Several former nurses came forward publicly. Lawyers became involved. The hospital board promised sweeping reforms. And Jason disappeared from public view entirely. His reputation collapsed alongside Brianna's. But the strangest part of all of it was this. I didn't feel victorious, just calm, because I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had simply unlocked the truth, and sometimes truth does the rest on its own. The morning after the gala felt strangely quiet, not the suffocating silence that had filled my apartment the night I discovered Jason's affair. This silence was different, lighter, like the air after a storm when everything has been washed clean. I woke up around 6 without an alarm. The early sunlight was slipping through the blinds, painting soft lines across the living room floor. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. I made coffee. Real coffee this time, not the endless bitter cups I had been drinking while staring at evidence and screenshots in the middle of the night. While the kettle boiled, my phone buzzed. Notifications. A lot of them. News alerts. Messages. Missed calls. I scrolled through them slowly. Memorial Hospital launches investigation after gala scandal. Prominent surgeon accused of years of misconduct. Leaked messages reveal toxic night shift culture. Maria Gonzalez had done exactly what investigative journalists do best. The story was everywhere. By mid-morning, Memorial Hospital had already placed Dr. Brianna Hayes on indefinite administrative leave. The board released a carefully worded statement about taking all allegations seriously and conducting a thorough review. Translation: they were trying to figure out how to distance themselves from a scandal that was already spreading faster than they could contain it. I poured my coffee and sat by the window. For the first time since everything started, I allowed myself to think about Jason, not with anger, just distance. He had called twice the night of the gala. I hadn't answered. He sent one text message. "Mia, please call me." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because I hated him, but because there was nothing left to say. A week later, I filed for divorce. Jason didn't contest it. In fact, he barely spoke during the legal process at all. The confident man who once thought he could juggle two lives had disappeared somewhere between the gala and the media coverage that followed. The truth had stripped him down to something quieter, smaller. I heard through mutual friends that he transferred to a different department at the hospital, far away from Brianna and the chaos she left behind. Brianna herself vanished almost immediately. Lawyers got involved. The hospital's investigation uncovered several previous complaints that had been quietly buried over the years. Some of the nurses Daniel had mentioned came forward publicly. Others remained anonymous, but allowed their stories to support the investigation. The system that had protected Brianna for so long suddenly found itself unable to ignore the pattern. And once patterns become public, they're very difficult to hide again. Daniel sent me a short email 2 weeks later. Just one sentence. "You did what I should have done years ago. Thank you." Emma moved away shortly after everything happened. She found a new job teaching fitness classes in another city where people didn't whisper about the scandal every time she walked into a room. Danny went back to his investigation business, though he still calls me occasionally, just to remind me that he was right about the gala being the most satisfying case of public accountability he'd ever seen. Life moves on like that, quietly. One piece at a time. As for me, I kept doing what I've always done. Fixing locks, installing security systems, helping people protect the spaces that matter to them. The funny thing is, people assume my job is about keeping danger out. But after everything that happened, I understand something much better now. Locks don't protect you from betrayal. They protect you after you realize who shouldn't have access anymore. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's something much simpler. Walking away with your dignity intact. Building a life that no longer includes the people who thought they could break you. Because the moment someone chooses to betray you, they've already removed themselves from the future you deserve. And once you understand that truth, closing the door behind them becomes surprisingly easy.